You are 26 years old when you pass the banking exam, and you celebrate with a glass of fondant and a phone call to your mother in Bern. You have worked for this with the single-minded patience that the Swiss consider a virtue and everyone else considers a personality defect. You studied double-entry bookkeeping at 16. You memorized the Swiss Code of Obligations the way other young men memorized football statistics. You interned at a cantonal bank in Zurich for 3 summers, wearing the same 2 suits on rotation, eating the same lunch at the same table, speaking only when necessary. You want nothing exotic from life. You want precision. You want the clean, verifiable satisfaction of a ledger that balances. You join Bank Privé Helvetia in Geneva at the bottom of the private wealth division. Your supervisor, a meticulous man named Burglar, who wears the same cufflinks every day and never raises his voice, tells you on your first morning that the bank's clients expect 2 things above everything: discretion and results. He does not elaborate. He does not need to. You understand that discretion here is not a courtesy. It is the product. The numbers are secondary. Silence is primary. You nod, and you mean it. And for 3 years, you keep accounts for retired industrialists and pharmaceutical heirs and the elderly widows of men whose fortunes were assembled in ways nobody examines too carefully anymore. Then, one afternoon in March, you are 29, it is raining, you have just corrected a rounding error in a holding structure tied to a Liechtenstein foundation. Burglar calls you into his office and closes the door. He does not sit. He stands at the window with his back to you for a long moment, which is unusual enough that something tightens in your chest. He turns and tells you that one of the bank's most significant relationships requires a new relationship manager. The previous one, a man you knew only by his corner office and his habit of leaving early on Fridays, has resigned suddenly. Burglar uses the word resigned the way people use the word retired when the alternative explanation is unpleasant. He tells you the client's assets under management represent approximately 340 million Swiss francs across 9 structures in 4 jurisdictions. He tells you this with the same tone he would use to describe a filing system. He tells you the client's name. You know the name. Everyone who reads a newspaper knows the name. The man is a former minister of an oil-producing state whose government has been under international sanctions for 11 months. There is, as of the previous September, an Interpol notice. There is a UN panel report with 47 pages of footnotes. Burglar watches your face while you absorb this. And then he says something you will turn over in your mind for the next 15 years. The structures are entirely legal under Swiss law as it stands. Your role is administrative, nothing more. He says it the way a surgeon might say the patient is already open, as though the most consequential decision has already been made by someone else, and your only job is to finish the procedure. You do not say yes immediately, and this is the thing you will later decide matters most about that afternoon, that you took 48 hours, that you went home and sat with it. But you also did not say no. You asked about the compensation adjustment. You asked about the legal review process. You treated it as a negotiation, which meant you had already accepted the premise. 2 days later, you sit back down in Burglar's office and you say you will take the relationship. You are 31 by the time you understand fully what you have agreed to. The work itself is not dramatic. This is the first thing that surprises you. You imagine something with the texture of crime, urgency, danger, rooms with drawn curtains. Instead, it is paperwork. It is conference calls with attorneys in Luxembourg and administrators in the Cayman Islands and nominee directors in Malta who respond to emails within 24 hours and speak in the flat professional language of people who have decided long ago not to think about what they are doing. The minister's money arrives in tranches through a Cyprus holding company into a Zurich account and then disperses outward through a series of foundations and sub-trusts and special purpose vehicles, the way water disperses through a delta. By the time it reaches anything with an identifiable shore, it is impossible to say where it started. You did not design this architecture. You inherited it. You maintain it. You answer the phone when the minister's son calls from Dubai to ask about a wire transfer, and you speak to him in the mild, measured tones of a man discussing nothing more consequential than the weather. The minister himself you meet once. He is smaller than you expected. He sits across from you in the bank's private client room, the one with the good chairs and no windows facing the street. And he talks for 20 minutes about his country's future, about Western hypocrisy, about the way sanctions punish ordinary people while enriching the politicians who impose them.
He is not stupid. Some of what he says is, in a technical sense, accurate. You listen and you nod at appropriate intervals, and when he is finished, you walk him through the quarterly statement and answer his questions about yield and currency exposure. You do not tell him that you went home after the first call from his son and stood in your kitchen for a long time staring at nothing. You do not tell him that you searched his name online and read 3 articles and then closed the browser and did not search again. You do not tell him any of this because it is not information relevant to the relationship and because you have begun, carefully and deliberately, to partition what you know.
This is the skill nobody trains you in, but everyone in your position eventually acquires. The ability to hold 2 truths simultaneously without allowing them to interact. The truth that the money exists, that it is managed, that the structures are sound. And the other truth, the one that lives in the partition you have constructed, the one you do not open. You become very good at this. It is, in a technical sense, a form of intelligence. By the time you are 35, you manage 7 significant relationships of this character. Not all of them are former government officials. One is a construction magnate from a country where construction contracts require certain arrangements that cannot appear in writing. One is a family office representing the interests of a man who is the subject of 3 separate criminal investigations in 3 separate countries, and whose lawyers have thus far successfully argued jurisdictional questions that have kept him out of any courtroom. One is a woman whose wealth derives from a logistics business that moves goods through ports where the inspections are conducted by officials her family has known for generations. You know the outlines of all of this. You do not know the details, and this is intentional, yours and theirs. The details are liabilities. The outlines are just the shape of the world.
The compliance team reviews your files quarterly. The external auditors review them annually. The legal opinions are updated whenever the regulatory environment shifts, which it does with increasing frequency after 2010, when the pressure on Swiss banking secrecy begins in earnest. You attend seminars on AML reform. You read the FATF guidance documents. You adjust the structures accordingly. That the work of keeping money hidden is not static. It is responsive. It is a continuous process of reading the regulatory terrain and repositioning, the way a chess player does not simply protect a piece, but anticipates the board 6 moves forward. You are good at this. You are, by your mid-30s, among the best in the bank at this.
The first moment you feel something give way is not when you read about the minister's country in the newspaper, though you do, and it is bad. There are photographs that you look at and then close and do not open again. The first real fracture comes when you are 41, and a compliance officer named Reyes, young, recently transferred from the bank's Madrid office, flags one of your accounts during a routine review. The flag is procedural, an anomalous transaction pattern in a subtrust connected to the construction magnate's family office. The pattern is, in fact, not anomalous once you understand the structure, and you explain this to Reyes in a meeting that lasts 40 minutes. You are patient. You are thorough. You use the word legitimate 11 times. Reyes takes notes and nods, and at the end of the meeting thanks you for the context. The flag is removed. But Reyes's expression when you explain the structure, not hostile, not accusatory, just very still, very careful, stays with you in a way that is new. You find yourself calculating backward that evening, not just about this account, but about all of them. You have been at the bank for 15 years.
You have managed, at various points, approximately 2.1 billion francs in assets for clients whose wealth originates in circumstances that range from aggressively tax-efficient to actively catastrophic for the people living nearest to where it was generated.
You have charged the bank's standard management fees on all of it, which means you have, personally, been compensated very well for a very long time. You live in a flat in Champel. You drive a conservative car. You have no particular vices. Your ex-wife, who left 4 years ago citing a quality she described as absence, lives in Basel with someone who teaches at the university. You have a daughter who is 9 and who visits on alternating weekends, and who asked you once what you do at work, and to whom you said you help people with their money, and who accepted this without further inquiry, the way children accept the large abstractions of adult life. After Reyes's visit, you start doing something you have not done in years. You look things up. Not the clients themselves, that partition holds still, but the countries, the policies, the outcomes. You read about infrastructure projects that were funded and never built, about aid flows that arrived and vanished, about the specific documented mechanism by which money extracted from public institutions and moved through private banking structures in stable jurisdictions causes measurable harm to public services in unstable ones. You read this the way someone reads a medical diagnosis, looking for the error, the misattribution, the reason it does not apply to your situation specifically. You do not find that reason.
You put your phone down and you go to bed, and in the morning you drive to the bank and you do your job. The OECD Common Reporting Standard changes things structurally in 2017. You spend the better part of 18 months restructuring 7 sets of arrangements to remain compliant with the new automatic information exchange requirements, which is to say, you spend 18 months finding the parts of the system that have not yet been closed and routing through them and documenting everything in ways that are technically accurate and contextually misleading. You bill considerable hours for this work. The clients are grateful in the way that people are grateful to doctors who deliver difficult news calmly, not warmly, but reliably. One client drops you in this period, migrating to a bank in Singapore that is slower to implement the new standards. You feel, briefly and unexpectedly, something that takes you a moment to identify as relief. You do not examine this too carefully. You have learned, over 15 years, is that the system you operate within is not an aberration. It is the system. The onshore banks and the offshore structures and the law firms and the trust companies and the nominee directors, none of these are hidden exactly. They are all licensed, all regulated within their jurisdictions, all staffed by professionals who attended the same universities as the people who write the regulations.
The circularity of this is something you understood intellectually from the beginning and understand viscerally now. When people on the outside speak about secret accounts and hidden money, they imagine dungeons. The reality is much more banal and therefore much more durable. It is conference rooms. It is legal opinions on letterhead. It is the shared professional language of people who have agreed not to ask certain questions in exchange for not having certain questions asked of them. You are 44 when Burglar retires, and a new head of private banking arrives from Frankfurt. A woman named Schreiber, younger than you, sharp in the specific way that people are sharp when they have decided to be effective first and thoughtful later. She calls you into her office in her second week and tells you that she wants to grow the bank's exposure to emerging market clients and that your book is considered a model for this segment. She asks what you need. You tell her you need better legal support on the East African jurisdictions and upgraded compliance software. She nods and makes a note. She does not ask about the nature of the clients. She does not need to. The nature of the clients is the point. That evening, you call your daughter, who is now 14 and serious in the way that her mother was serious, interested in everything, committed to fairness in the specific, passionate way of adolescents who have not yet had to calculate the cost of their principles. She is doing a school project on tax havens, she tells you. She has found some reports from Oxfam and an investigation by a European journalism consortium, and she wants to know what you think.
She does not know exactly what you do. She knows you work in private banking. The gap between those two facts is something you have maintained with care. You tell her it is a complex topic. You tell her there are legitimate uses for international structures, that not all offshore activity is illicit, that the regulatory environment is improving. She listens, and then she says, in the tone of someone who has been doing research, that the reports she read said that most of the money involved belongs to people who stole it from governments.
You say that the word stole involves a legal determination that courts make, not banks. There is a pause. She says, okay, but the people who move the money for them, they know, right? They have to know. You do not answer immediately. The pause is long enough that she says your name, not dad, your actual name, the way teenagers do when they want an adult to be serious. You say, yes, in a general sense, there is knowledge of the sources. She asks how people live with that. You say that people find ways to frame their role as limited, as procedural, as not the decisive act in the chain. She says that sounds like an excuse. You say that most moral accommodations sound like excuses when you describe them plainly.
She is quiet for a moment, and then she says she has to finish her essay, and she will see you next weekend.